Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Cultural and Linguistic Competency webinar series for 2020. This is our second installment. We are just welcoming everyone into the webinar. You will also see from the chat box that we'd love for you to introduce yourself with your name, location, if you're from a particular county, if you're from Pennsylvania, or if you're from outside of Pennsylvania, we'd also love to know that. Your affiliation or potentially a staff position, if you're a family member, youth member, system partner, if you are working under a particular grant that you'd like us to be aware of. And then we also have made the presentation slides along with the report that's being discussed today available in the chat box, and we will upload those one more time in case they're not showing directly for you. So as I see that folks are starting to sign in and adding their names and affiliations, thank you so much. We are here today because we are featuring a keynote by Noelia Rivera-Calderón, who's joining us to discuss a research report that was issued called "We Are Not Invisible, Protecting Latina Mental Health in Schools." And she's also going to go beyond just what was in the report to detail more about her experience and background in this particular area and on this particular topic. So for those who are joining us, my name is Kelsey Leonard. I am the Cultural and Linguistic Competence Coordinator, or CLC Coordinator, for the Pennsylvania Care Partnership. If at any point today you have questions or concerns or comments, you can type those into the chat box. And if for some reason you don't get a question answered, or you are pondering about this webinar after today's session ends, and you'd like to get in touch with me about the potential for accessing more resources or learning more about what was discussed today, or potentially even working on a CLC project within the state of Pennsylvania, please email me. This is my email included on the slides, leonardkt@upmc.edu. Next, this series, today's presentation, is a part of a larger series, 3 installments. Our next installment will be on Thursday, May 28th, at the same time as today, 2:30 to 4 o'clock. And it's going to be featuring a keynote by Sharon Washington. She's going to be talking about intersectionality, particularly her talk is entitled Intersectionality Matters, Mitigating Unconscious Bias and Unintended Consequences in Behavioral Health Care. And so one of the key things with this talk is we are really trying to tailor the presentation to your experiences in your counties, at your organizations. And so we are doing that by having you complete a survey in advance of the webinar. So the link to the survey is available here. We really encourage you to fill it out. It's kind of similar to maybe if you've done a CLC self-assessment before. It really tries to look at what are some of our personal experiences with unconscious bias in the workplace, and how we might mitigate that, or what experiences we've had around mitigating that. So that's a little bit of a preview and some encouragement to attend the last installment of our webinar series that will occur on May 28th. And without further ado, it's really a pleasure now to introduce Noelia. So Noelia, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then this will be the point at which you can start to share yours as I do a formal introduction for you. So for everyone on the line, we really have just been so fortunate to connect with Noelia. Noelia Rivera-Calderón, Esquire, is an attorney, a former teacher, and a Tom Steele Fellow at the National Women's Law Center. Their work focuses on ensuring safe and supportive learning environments for students, particularly LGBTQ+ students of color. And now at NWLC, she's spearheaded the report that she's going to be speaking about today and featuring a lot of our conversations around, called "We Are Not Invisible, Latina Girls, Mental Health, and Philadelphia Schools." And she has also led ongoing advocacy for Latina mental health in schools at the federal and local levels, along with her colleagues at NWLC. So again, we can't thank you enough for joining us today, Noelia, and I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Kelsey. Can you confirm that I am not muted? That this
you are not muted, we
Perfect.
can hear you, and the PowerPoint is showing up perfectly.
Perfect, great. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey and Pennsylvania Care Partnership. And thank you to everyone for joining us today, especially in these unpredictable and difficult times. You being here just really shows to me your commitment to our youth. So I know that I really appreciate it, and I hope that you're all doing your best to stay safe and healthy and well. Yeah, so as Kelsey said, my name is Noelia Rivera-Calderón, and I am an attorney and policy advocate at the National Women's Law Center. So just briefly to talk a little bit about what we do, we fight for gender justice in all ways, in the courts, in public policy, and in social change. We work across the issues central to the lives of women and girls. We use the law and policy in all its forms to change culture and drive solutions to the gender inequities that shape our society and break down the barriers that harm all of us, especially those who face multiple forms of discrimination, including women of color, LGBTQ people, and low-income women and families. I am really lucky to work on the education team at the National Women's Law Center, where I get to focus on issues of education-based equity and justice. A little bit more about my background is that before I decided to go to law school and go into policy, I was a teacher in Philadelphia schools. For a few years, I taught in primarily Latinx middle school, and found that a lot of the concerns that I'd had as a student myself in the Philadelphia school system were things that just were not getting better for the students that I was teaching. And that's really what led to my career change into advocacy, though I still, know and absolutely respect that our teachers and our mental health professionals are really on the front lines with students, and can't say enough about how important you all are. I'm also a migrant from Puerto Rico. I identify as Latina. That has informed my experience as a student. I came to the United States from Puerto Rico when I was about 4 years old. I was not an English speaker, started school speaking only Spanish, kind of went through that whole system, not having gotten very much support. It took me a few years to catch up to my peers. And that experience really kind of helped me see all the challenges that students face who were even less lucky than I was to have gotten access to the supports that I needed. And yeah, all of this really shapes my perspective and the work that I choose to take on, like this report that I'm here to talk about. So this report is one of my major projects at the National Women's Law Center. The report and all of the advocacy work that has come from it, it is called We Are Not Invisible: Latina Girls, Mental Health, and Philadelphia Schools. It is a participatory action research report that was co-written with 13 Latina and Latinx students in Philadelphia. We decided to focus for this report on Latina girls and non-binary Latinx students, and I want to talk a little bit about why. One is that there are just some shocking realities in terms of mental health outcomes that I'm going to go into in this presentation. And also that we, in working with this group of students, found some commonalities in this experience of shared oppression, and things that we have been able to kind of back up in terms of the research. So incredibly low access to healthcare access, the anti-Latino bias contributing to under-identification for mental health and disability services, and contributing to over-disciplining of students with mental health needs. And also some cultural commonalities in terms of gender expectations that a lot of the girls felt were contributing to stereotypes in the way that they were being seen by society, especially in regards to their mental health. So this is a lot of why we felt this was a topic worth exploring, and something that still we're fighting to get the attention that it needs. So before I really get into the findings of the report and our recommendations, I just want to do a brief note on the terminology that I'm using, and what I mean when I say Latino, Latina, Latinx. For anyone that is there like, oh, I totally know this, you know, I don't need to hear it again. That's totally great. Thank you so much for your patience. But I never like to assume where anyone is coming from. So I figured it couldn't hurt to just kind of go through and be intentional about why I'm using the words that I'm using. So it's important to start with the fact that 1 in 4 students nationwide are Latino or Latinx. And in a generation, it's probably going to be closer to 1 in 3. So we're talking about a very significant population of our students right now that, despite being such a large contingent of the population, still don't really feel that their identities and their needs and their experiences are being fully understood. When I use the word Latinx, I am referring either to a person who identifies as non-binary, so neither male nor female, or to a group of mixed gender people, boys, girls, men, women, non-binary individuals. Latinx is pioneered by LGBTQ activists in the US and in Latin America, and is coming into more common usage as a term for the community as a whole. I will say that there are those who prefer not to use it and who prefer to use Latino, as is traditionally done, to describe the community as a whole. I think that it comes down to a matter of personal preference, and kind of whether you're in an LGBTQ oriented or inclusive space is kind of the distinction that I've seen. But I do use Latino to refer to a boy or a man or a group of boys or men, Latina to refer to girls and women and groups of girls and women. There are people that prefer Hispanic. That is also something widely used. Again, I think a lot of times it comes down to a matter of preference, but Latino and Hispanic do technically mean different things. Hispanic is someone with origins in a Spanish-speaking country, and Latino, Latina, or Latinx is someone of Latin American origin or descent. So someone from Spain is Hispanic but not Latinx. Someone from Brazil is Latinx but not Hispanic. So it's just important to be intentional there. This is an incredibly diverse community. Latin America is a whole continent. We're talking about a group of people who speak literally hundreds of languages, between Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, and hundreds of indigenous languages. We're talking about a group of people of all races, Black, white, Asian, indigenous, brown, mixed, everything. We're talking about a group of people of different skin tones, different socioeconomic statuses, different gender identities and sexual orientations. It can be very difficult to discuss the community as a whole. There are people that prefer to just be called by their country of origin, so Mexican American, Cuban American, and that's totally fine. When I use Latina, Latino, or Latinx, I'm using it as a term of solidarity, as a way of saying, I recognize that this is a community of wide differences, and that in many ways, my experiences as someone who's Puerto Rican are going to be different than someone with origins in Mexico or Brazil or Argentina, etc. However, we do have some common histories in the experience of colonialism, and in the way that we're treated here in the United States. Obviously, nothing is a blanket experience, and we have to be really mindful that Latinx people who hold different identities often do get treated different ways. But at the same time, we can talk about some commonalities while also holding space for the multiplicities. So that's kind of that, the complicated picture of Latinx, Latina, and Latino identity. The one other thing that I will say is that in the US, we are also diverse in that while many of us are immigrants, many of us are also US born and have been in the US for generations. Most young Latinx people in the US, young people, children, are US born, and most speak English as their first language. So there are some shifting demographics. Often with the students that I worked with, the students spoke English as their first language and had parents who spoke Spanish as their first language. That is pretty common with current generations. Obviously, there is a huge contingent of students who are immigrants and who are English learners and whose needs are going to be unique from students who are US born and speak English as a first language. But there are also many mixed status families. So families with parents who might be immigrants or who might be undocumented and children who are not, or even vice versa. So these are all just important things to be mindful of. Not every Latinx person is an immigrant or speaks Spanish or looks a certain way, etc. So in working on this report, we used Latina, Latino, Latinx as a self-identification, worked with students who identified themselves this way, and were able to find some of the common threads that I'm going to be talking about a little more. So shifting to kind of my personal impetus for doing this work. So I'm someone now who has shifted to working pretty heavily in mental health advocacy, in large part due to some of my personal experiences with mental health. So this is a picture of me that was in an article in a series called Anxiety Chronicles. So it's just a very interesting experience now to be a person whose picture can be covered with words like lightheaded, muscle spasms, dissociation, as part of my job now to be a mental health advocate. So I do find it very important to be open about my own mental health because so many people still feel so heavily stigmatized in talking about mental health. So if there's anything I can do to kind of talk about it and show that mental health concerns are very common and something that people live with, that's kind of the choice that I'm making right now. I have always struggled with anxiety from the time that I was a very young child. I just remember feeling so anxious about things that it would feel like my throat would just get caught up and I can't breathe. And I didn't understand it for a long time, and neither did anyone around me. It wasn't until high school that it started kind of escalating to the point that others started to take notice. So when I was a junior in high school, I started just getting so anxious and so overwhelmed that every day when I would go to school, I would just throw up right away when I got there. I would arrive at school, run to the bathroom, and throw up. Because one of my symptoms of anxiety is nausea, and it just makes me want to throw up. So I remember doing that for a few days, not really understanding what it was, thinking I must have been sick. I went to the school nurse, and the first few days she would call my parents. They would come to take me home. They thought maybe I had the flu or something. But when it kept happening, day after day, when I would have the nausea and the vomiting and just the feeling that like I'm so in my head that I can't even breathe. The school nurse kind of didn't really know what to do anymore. She stopped calling my parents to come take me home. And she told me, I guess this is just what you do now. So I was basically told, you know, if you want to miss class, go sit in the library. Like, if you want to put your head down, go do that. But there wasn't really any effort to, you know, make sure that I was still getting my education or kind of to figure out what was going on. Later on, I had progressed into self-harming, and my school counselor did notice that I was doing that and basically said, stop it. Just looked at me and said, stop it. But made no attempt to get me any kind of counseling or, you know, mental health support, therapy, anything like that. So the message that I got was that my pain really didn't matter. And that's a message that unfortunately too many of our students are hearing right now. I remember that I would put my head down in class because I was so overwhelmed, I was depressed, and no one would kind of check in with me to ask how I was doing. And obviously, when I was a teacher, I had, you know, tons of empathy for teachers who are just overwhelmed. But this all makes me know for sure that our systems can do better and that we all should be more resourced so that we can respond when students are exhibiting signs that something is not right mental health wise, and get students the support that they need. So the biggest takeaway from my story, and the reason I tell it, is because it is not at all unique, especially in Pennsylvania, especially among Latina girls. Here's the first reason why we did this report. In Philadelphia, over half of Latina high school girls have felt persistently sad or hopeless. This is one of the highest rates in the country for persistent sadness and hopelessness. It is higher for Latina girls, high school girls, than any other demographic that was surveyed. It is higher, significantly higher for girls than for boys. And Philadelphia and Pennsylvania both exceed the national average in terms of students reporting they are persistently sad or hopeless. And when they say persistently sad or hopeless, this is from the Centers for Disease Control, they mean to the point of being unable to do usual life activities for a period of weeks or longer. So these are students who are so sad or hopeless, they cannot carry on usual life activities for more than a few weeks at a time. More than that, 1 in 5 Latina girls, both nationwide and in Philadelphia, considered suicide in 2017, a full 20%. 2017 was the last year that data was available. And 1 in 7 Latina girls in Philadelphia attempted suicide in the year of 2017 alone, so made an attempt at taking their own life. This is a rate that exceeds the national average and exceeds rates of comparable large cities in the US. In Philadelphia, the problem is particularly severe. I'll just come back to that. But this is Pennsylvania as a whole. So nearly half of Latina girls in Pennsylvania as a whole were persistently sad or hopeless in 2017. That tracks with the national average for Latina girls. 1 in 5 considered suicide, and over 1 in 8 attempted suicide in the year 2017. That's a rate that exceeds the national rate of 1 in 10. For girls who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, this is astronomically higher. So a full 1 in 2 Latinas who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual in Philadelphia considered suicide, fully half, and 2 in 5 attempted suicide. Now, we're using Philadelphia as an example because these rates are severe compared to comparable cities and to the nation as a whole. But to be honest, this is evidence of a problem nationwide. So in Pennsylvania and nationwide. The nationwide statistics, Latina girls are still exceeding others in terms of reporting persistent sadness and hopelessness, consideration of suicide, and suicide attempt. This is something that has been consistent for over 30 years at this point. So we are trying to bring the level of attention that this deserves to something that has been going on for over 30 years without significant attention. Sometimes people ask me if the current Trump administration is having any effect on these rates, or whether this is something that pre-existed the current administration. And the truth is that it pre-existed the current administration. However, there are also new studies coming out all the time on the mental health effects of zero tolerance immigration policy. So when I say zero tolerance immigration policy, I'm talking about family separation, but not just family separation. Any policy that has as its purpose to permanently separate families by removing and deporting people from the United States, rounding up people in raids and, sending them away or putting them in detention. I've done this presentation several times in other settings, and every time I do this presentation, I update this slide to put in another headline of more research that is coming out about the mental health effects of immigration policy. So right now, we're waiting for the 2019 numbers to come out on sadness, hopelessness, suicide attempt, and suicidal ideation, but I'm not optimistic that things are getting better based on some of these studies. So that's all the bad news. We got through the darkest parts of this presentation. The good news is that our students are ready to take this on. Our students want to feel that they have power, and mental health concerns, mental illness, mental health disabilities really does a lot to make you feel like you can't trust yourself, or that you're worthless, or that you have no power. And that is what these students, these girls, have reported experiencing, that they have no power, that they're worthless, that that no one cares whether they live or die. I mean, all kinds of things that are just heartbreaking to hear. But what we found in working on this report was when we give them an opportunity to propose solutions and to be part of the solution and to treat them as experts and to share their expertise, they jump at the opportunity. They really want to help. They want to do something. And their recommendations are what created this report, which I highly encourage that you read the full report. It's full of their voices and it's full of their recommendations. What was really interesting about working with students, and we worked with students from around 8th to 12th grade, middle and high school. What was interesting is that they would independently suggest recommendations for better schools that support mental health that ended up being evidence-based practice. But they didn't know that. They were just talking from their own experience. They would say things like, we really need peer support circles. Turns out peer support circles are very effective for students. They talk about the need to change the entire school culture. That was something they kept coming back to, like, to help students, you need to change the entire school culture. And, at first we thought, like, well, that's kind of broad. I mean, of course we want to change the school culture. But that's something that I have since learned is, very much part of like critical mental health awareness, and kind of the idea in trauma-informed education that, it's not just about the individual, it's about the entire environment. It's about everything that goes into making someone feel safe or not safe. It really is a matter of school culture. So I'm going to next shift to going into some of the findings of the report and then turning to the recommendations. And also I see in the chat box, there may be some questions. I'm still kind of navigating how this works on my computer, but I promise that if I'm not getting to a question, I will get to it at the end. So thanks for your patience on that. So the first major finding of our report is that Latina girls and Latinx students are not more susceptible to mental health challenges than other students, but they get far less support. And that's what makes the difference. That's what creates those statistics. So, and that is important because sometimes people will ask me, well, maybe Latina girls just have a biological predisposition to get mental illness. And that is something that has not been proven ever. I think we can assume that that's not true. Of course, there is something to be said for, generational trauma and kind of the effects on a person of that. But that's not the same as to say, just because of who you are, you're more likely to have a serious mental illness. So, different groups have, pretty equal susceptibility to mental health challenges, but there are a few factors that are keeping Latinas behind. So one is that Latinas in this country have the least access to healthcare, the least access to health insurance, including mental health care. And they are also the least likely to use mental health services even when they are available. They're less likely to use mental health services both because of the impact of stigma in the Latinx community and in society at large, and because many mental health services are not culturally competent or accessible to the community. The other problem is that conditions continue to be created that pose a severe risk to Latinx mental health and to people's sense of worth as a person. So examples are, the ramp up of anti-migrant language, the things like lack of support for Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. It all kind of combines to send this message about your worth as a person and how much your society values you. Why do Latinas get less access to care? Again, stigma and also lack of being identified. So talking about students specifically. So Latina girls are less likely than boys and girls overall to be identified for disability services when they need them. Girls are already less likely than boys to be identified, and Latina girls are even less likely than girls and boys. There are also concerns with immigration status. If you're an immigrant or your family, you are a family of immigrants or a mixed status family, there can be more fears with accessing healthcare. There can be language needs that aren't being met. There can be a lack of cultural connection with providers. And then on top of all of that, even when Latinas are identified for mental health services, for disability services, they are twice as likely to be punished for their needs, including by being suspended at school. It's important to remember that students are not the cause of their own trauma. A lot of Latinx students are living in environments that we create as a society that aren't really helping and that are actually hurting. The combined effect is that the lack of support worsens their struggles, making them harder to beat and more persistent. Excuse me. So the lack of support makes the mental health challenges, the mental health conditions harder to beat and more persistent. A lack of support, I'm sure everyone here knows, can impact a student for a lifetime. Mental health has been identified as a reason that Latinas struggle to complete college, why they remain less likely to complete college and high school than their peers. And we need to look at how this starts in elementary school, middle school, high school. If students are then behind in education, this is one of the things that contributes to the wage gap. Latinas on average lose over $1 million over a lifetime to the wage gap. As a group, they experience an incredibly large wage gap compared to white men of earning 54 cents to every dollar that a white man earns. There are many factors for this, but we know that we shouldn't be doing anything that keeps Latinas further behind. Promise I don't have COVID-19. This is just an anxiety cough for anyone wondering. I'm fine. While these severe mental health challenges, as I've stated, pre-existed the Trump administration could be making it worse. We at the National Women's Law Center did some research that more than half of Latina girls are worried about a friend or family member being deported. 1 in 4 has been harassed since the 2016 election due to her family name or country of origin, and 1 in 5 has been harassed or bullied because of her identity. There are already, as I mentioned, studies of increased mental health concerns in Latinx populations broadly. Something interesting that our students brought to light was the role of stereotypes and how they feel that that impacts whether or not they're identified as a person who needs support. They talked about stereotypes of Latina girls and women as crazy, as dramatic, as fiery, that is just how people see them. And they feel that people see their mental health struggles as a cultural flaw or just as how they are. Like, oh, she's Latina, she's supposed to be a little crazy. She's supposed to be all over the place. She's supposed to be fiery. She's supposed to be dramatic. The girls that we worked with really talked about what a profound impact things like this have in terms of how people see them and don't see them as worthy of help and support. There's also a role of gender-based expectations. A lot of the girls that we spoke with talked about expectations that they put others before themselves, that things that hit Latina girls in a way that they don't necessarily always hit Latino boys. Just this expectation that family is first, you put others before you, you think about others first, and that you don't really get space to have your own needs, that's kind of a thing that you have to deal with on your own. There were so many examples from our co-authors of feeling stigmatized and shamed in their schools, even by adults whose job it was to support them, even by counselors, even by teachers. So I have just a few quotes from the report to kind of highlight this. A student named Angela said, "At my old school, the counselor would try to make me feel like what I was going through was my fault." Yesenia said, "When we ask for help, there's always a lot of pushback." Yvonne said, "People say get over it. It's not that bad. Just move on. They don't stop and ask, what have you been going through? They just say get over it." A student who would like to have their name remain anonymous stated, "Last year I was going through a lot of stuff, and one of my teachers would treat me differently from other students. I was out a lot for mental health reasons, and I tried to talk to her because I saw my grades slipping and didn't want to fail. Tried to talk to her to see if there's anything I could do to restore my grades. I got more personal and told her the reasons why, the depression, and she blamed it on me not coming to school. She said my depression was caused by me missing school. It made me feel less than." So even our girls who are, breaking the stigmas, who are asking for help, a lot of times are not finding it in the right places, especially in their schools. This has the cumulative effect of kind of either negatively impacting or being harmfully indifferent to Latina and Latinx mental health, resulting in school pushout. So when we talk about school pushout at the National Women's Law Center, we use this instead of dropout to talk about the factors that push girls of color, Black and brown girls, from school instead of pulling them into school. Because students don't make choices in a vacuum, students are actively pushed out of school, either by over-disciplining and also by things like lack of mental health resources. Latinas in Pennsylvania have high rates of chronic absenteeism. 10% in Pennsylvania did not go to school because they felt unsafe either at school or on the way to school. This is the highest for any demographic in Pennsylvania. And this 10% doesn't even account for other mental health related chronic absence, which we also know is high. This comes back to lower rates of completing high school and college. So part of our push with this report is to broaden our idea of what school push out looks like. High school students with significant symptoms of depression are more than twice as likely to leave school compared to their peers. So turning to the recommendations, and they are, very comprehensively detailed in the report. So I'm just going to hit kind of the top line recommendations, which are mainly for schools, but really can be useful to anyone who works with students. So one, the girls really emphasize the entire school culture needs to change to prioritize student wellness. Students also need to feel affirmed in their school curriculum and be represented in teaching and counseling staff. And students need to be taught their rights and need to be taught what resources are available to them so they can get the help and the accommodations that they need. I also just wanted to emphasize again that students do have the solutions and can lead the way to building mentally healthy school climates for all students. Mental health resources, more mental health support, I'm sure we know, are good for everyone, for every student, not just Latina students. It's easy to kind of get stuck in a cycle of talking about the problems, but our co-authors and the report are solutions focused. And while Latina girls and non-binary Latinx students are experiencing some of these challenges disproportionately, and we want to lift them up as leaders on this issue, their recommendations will make schools better for all students. This is just, the next slide is just a picture of some of the enthusiasm when I go do workshops in schools. The names at the bottom of the page, that is a list of every student when I gave a workshop that they said wanted to work to make positive changes for mental health in their own schools. They ended up forming these little committees of kind of the different things they wanted to tackle. So there were a few students that wanted a mental health break space at their school. There were some students who wanted to push their school for mental health training, like mental health first aid. There were some students who wanted to form a mental health club. Some students who wanted to push for more diverse hiring. There is just so much energy here, and I feel and know that kind of tapping into that energy and working with students on this can be very effective. Teachers, other mental health professionals can also protect students' rights under IDEA and Section 504. It's definitely, it's going to be a case-by-case thing. This is an amazing thing for some students, not always necessarily for others, depending on the exact circumstances of the students, but a lot of students and families don't know that they even have rights under disability law. It wasn't until I was in law school and speaking to a special education attorney that I learned that I could have been eligible for an IEP solely because of my anxiety. So for anyone not familiar, this is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to provide accommodations and, a free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities in schools, which does include mental health. And an IEP is an individualized education program made with a team of people, the student, the family, teachers, mental health professionals, to set goals and create accommodations for students. Everyone has a role to play in building better school climates for Latina and Latinx students. So these are some of the things that, if you don't work directly in a school, you can still advocate for. You can still keep in mind when you work with students, kind of what are the things that you should be advocating for from your policymakers, your school board, etc. So school leaders, culture building, school climate is one of school leaders' biggest jobs. They should build a culture of respect in their schools that acknowledges students' mental health concerns. District leaders, superintendents, etc., can find ways to figure out how students are struggling in a way that's not invasive and that is confidential and that is about connecting students with resources. And they can make sure that educators are trained in things like mental health first aid or know where to direct students for appropriate resources. It's not that we want teachers to be counselors, though many teachers are kind of de facto taking on that role. It's that we want teachers to be able to know where's the right place, like who is the right person, like what is the right thing to do in this situation. Lawmakers should fund programs that create more pipelines for Latinx educators and mental health professionals of color, and require schools to teach students of their rights under state and federal law. Students, parents, community members, anybody can voice their concerns to school leaders and elected officials at school board meetings and city council hearings, and hold elected officials accountable. This is something that we have been doing for a while. So our students who co-wrote the report have spoken to the press. They have held rallies in front of the Philadelphia School Board. They have talked and called out directly Superintendent Height. They have met with members of Congress, anyone who will listen about these issues. This is not just about our schools. It's not just about Pennsylvania. This is about culture change on mental health in the Latinx community. This is a movement. Our student co-authors and other students inspired by them are already making an impact. There is right now a state bill was introduced in Virginia around mental health break spaces. There is a federal bill that could be upcoming on resource equity for mental health in schools. And there have been changes in individual schools already inspired by this report. And that's really what we want. These are some of our recommendations for schools. They're outlined in much more detail in the report itself. So things like training, break spaces, peer support circles, more diverse hiring, working with community groups, dress codes were actually a big thing that we also do work on at the National Women's Law Center. It can be a little surprising when you're like, oh, I don't connect dress codes with mental health, but for the girls we spoke to, it was really about feeling very scrutinized and very policed in their bodies in a way that just creates a culture of discomfort. So that was one of the recommendations. Representation in their school curriculum, anonymous dress surveys, and making sure students have access to their rights and resources. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour of the report. I am going to stop here for any questions, and I also wanted to put up my email address. Definitely reach out to me. I'm pretty good about checking my email, especially now working from home. And for more resources, articles, and a report order form, if you order copies, we'll send them to you. Not immediately because we're not physically in our office, but when we get back physically to our office, we'll mail them to you at no cost. So that's nwlc.org/notinvisible. So yeah, I'll stop here for questions. Kelsey, let me know how I should do this. Do I go in the chat or you'll let me know?
Thank you so much, Noelia, for your presentation. For folks that are participating, we would love if you would type your question into the chat box, and then we'll be sure to read it out loud so that we have it on the webinar, and then Noelia will respond. So we're open for questions now in the chat box.
Okay, just scrolling up to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
And then if anyone is calling in by phone and you don't have access to the chat box and you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute your line and ask it out loud.
Yeah, so.
Hi, hello.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michele Sanchez. I am a family peer support partner from Mental Health Partnerships, and the program is Parents Involved Network. I am a parent of two wonderful children. They both have mental health. Mm-hmm. I appreciate Ms. Noelia providing us with your experience and your very well dedicated support advocacy in the community. I want to say thank you personally because it has been just the same way with me.
Yeah.
And in elementary school, that was horrible. That was one of the reasons why I ran from Philadelphia to Puerto Rico back again and did my high school over there. I was brutally teased, bullied, you name it, I was. So language also was another barrier, and that really created a horrible experience to the point that I literally forced my mother and asked my grandparents, please take over me. So that's how severe it is, and I greatly appreciate your story, and I'm thankful that you are connected at this level. My biggest concern at this point is that I do want to have those studies, and I do want to follow up moving forward with this. We are a grateful, supportive program to all genders in schools and community. But especially in schools, we really advocate very strongly for all these gender, doesn't matter who you are. And yes, we advocate for those specialized supports such as an IEP and 504 plans. And if the parents don't know and need something further, we refer them to community agencies, but we also refer them to educational lawyers. Let the parents choose from there on. However, this is a massive concern. We hear it, especially in the crisis response center. You hear this constantly. And it all starts from school. Unfortunately, it's like you stated, teachers are overwhelmed. There's some teachers that are providing, and counselors too, but others not. Some schools are prepared, some schools are not. But I am very happy to know that these students are getting the voices loud and clear all across and nationwide. So I thank you for you, and I am happy to hear, and I'm thankful for being in this chat. I am on the phone, so unfortunately I don't have no slides, no chat box, but thank you. That's just for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your advocacy. That just always is what makes me happy to hear, because I know that there are so many people in our community who are fighting so hard for our students. People who have had the experiences that we've had. I mean, I relate a lot to what you were saying. It's not easy, and it doesn't seem to be getting easier. So I just thank you so much for sharing that. And it really means a lot to me. I'm definitely going to keep fighting, and I will also say that we have sent a copy of this report to every school in Philadelphia. So we're still out there. We'll back you up. For any additional advocacy that you're doing, please stay in touch, because this is an ongoing fight. So thank you again.
Noelia, we have a question, I believe, from someone on the webinar named Guadalupe Santos. I'm going to lower your hand, Guadalupe, if you'd like to unmute.
Hey, hi. Thank you. Your story kind of reminded me of me when I came from Puerto Rico. I was probably like 6, 7 years old, did not speak English. My parents did not speak English, and it was hard for me. And it was very frustrating, not only because my parents didn't speak English, but I had to depend on people that I'm not close to. And you also talked about the environment as well. And that played a role also in my life as well, that I was always searching, where do I belong? You know? And it's pretty touching because you really reminded me of me, and my tears want to come out.
Yeah.
Because till today, I'm still trying to fit where I belong.
Yeah.
And And I try to be as open-minded as I can, because not only that we have a culture, but we have norms, and we have traditions that came from our ancestors, you know, and I still carry that with me, you know, and I truly believe it, and that's part of me, yeah, and but I try to support. I work with community behavioral health, and I always try to like support the Latino community the best way I can. And when I'm speaking to parents, I always open up a discussion. Do you have children? And my intentions is, if they have any issues, then I can help them with, including, you know, not only the parents, but also the family.
Right.
And so that allowed me to like do my part as well. Just like my girlfriend, she worked with WHYY, and she's, you know, with the education department, and she says, Lupe, you know, I need some Latino students. And I say, well, let's go, let's make some flyers. And we started going, because that helps them to raise up their self-esteem, to be part of something, you know. And but still till today, I still feel disconnected with the communication part, especially at work. Not with all my coworkers, you know, but sometimes I say to myself, am I speaking English? Do we understand each other? Did I say something that maybe they don't understand? Because how clear can I be? And so, yeah, I'm still living in that dilemma. Let's say it that way as well. And I try to be as open-minded as I can, because it's something that we or I live with, that other people don't understand. So I try not to be take it offended as well, you know. And but also, you know, and not too long ago, I took a training on cultural sensitivity and cultural competence, you know, and I stood quiet, because it's much deeper than that. It's our norm, what we came to like live around our families, grandparents, and things of that nature, that a lot of non-Spanish people or non-Latino people don't understand, you know. And we have, so, you know, just, I truly thank you, because you really brought me back. You really brought me back, and way back when I came from Puerto Rico, going to school, where do I belong, the environment, pushing myself, understanding, you know, two worlds. Two worlds. And you talked about the election as well. And I had to defend myself too. When the election with 2016, I had to defend myself, because non-Spanish people were just coming at me, you know, and I had to like really like stand up. And so yeah, I truly thank you so much. It was so interesting. A lot of people should have been here, more than 59.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that too. And I related a lot to what you said, and I almost getting the tears myself too. And I think that there's a lot that's still under researched too, in terms of the role of, I don't know, feeling this conflict about identity, and what the role that has on mental health, because I think that that's actually huge, and that's something that I see more and more. And I think something common to a lot of Latinx people is kind of the, you know, I'm not from here, I'm not from there, you know, who am I, where do I fit in? And I think that's something that has a huge impact. And also, I mean, this is just me theorizing, I don't have proof for this, but I think could go to why this is so difficult for people in our community too. And yeah, just a lot of the experiences. I was a very young English learning student. I was 4, so I still, you know, had the opportunity to start learning English really young, but, and English is the language I'm like most comfortable in right now. But even now I will find myself confusing idioms, and having that experience of like, wait, did I say the wrong thing? Like trying to make myself understood, or like, I don't know, I feel like they're not getting what I'm trying to say, even though I've been speaking English for over 20 years now. So yeah, definitely that. And there was something else I wanted to say too, but really I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you for all of the work you're doing. Oh yeah, I remember, it was that the day of the 2016 election, I was actually called a racial slur at my polling place. Yeah, and soon after that, I was taking a bus ride somewhere, and a group of people pointed to me and said I look like I'm an MS-13. So like, this is, I mean, and I'm experiencing it at a much lower level than a lot of our students in school are experiencing it right now, where we're hearing reports of students who get chanted at, you know, build the wall, build the wall. This is something very severe right now. So yeah, thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing this. I really appreciate it very much. Let's see.
Noelia, yeah, we have a question in the chat box from Michele
Yes.
Taylor. It says, is there any research that explains possible reasons why Pennsylvania is showing higher numbers of mental health in the Latino community than other states in the country, and why people feel less supported in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So since that was outside the scope of this report, just in terms of like outside the scope of our research resources, that's something we weren't able to get into too much. We have some ideas, but I really hope that there are researchers out there who kind of take up the mantle on that. So one thing about Philadelphia in particular is that it's actually the most active ICE office in the country, so immigrations and customs enforcement. So the most active in terms of the most arrests for processing for deportation of immigrants for nonviolent offenses. The Philadelphia ICE office is the most active in the country. So, and we know that part of what is harming the community as a whole is fear of being targeted because you look a certain way, and because people assume that you're here, quote, illegally. So Unidos US put out an interesting report recently that basically said that this fear of like ICE and fear of immigration enforcement is harming students, whether they are immigrants or—
I don't know what it is. Before take you up there before you get to the last.
Sorry, we had a bit of a interruption there, but go ahead, Noelia.
Oh, no problem. I'll keep going. The report basically said that regardless of whether students are immigrants or US born, the fear that they have of their friends, their family members being targeted, or the fear that they have that they, even if they are citizens, are going to be targeted is very real for a lot of children. So that's one possible explanation, but beyond that, I would love to see more research on what's going on in Pennsylvania. In terms of our report, our approach was kind of, you know, whatever the problem is, we need the solutions. So we really focused on the recommendations from students. We were like, you know, whatever it is, even if there's something in the water, whatever, we still need the solutions. So that's what we're gonna focus on. But I think that it's a really interesting question, and I hope more people do work on that. So thank you.
So we have another participant that's added to the conversation. And this is a bit more longer, but I think it's important to share what they wrote. So I'm just gonna read that out for you. A group of us have advocated in our school district for 5 years to just be ignored and dismissed. My oldest son lived with a severe mental health impairment and left school in his last year. I appreciate the term school push out, as we as we realized many of the elected officials refused to move to make it better. We lost our son in 2017 because of all of the things that you have listed today. I am currently a candidate for our state house seat in the 87th district. I'm running because of seeing leaders ignore the most vulnerable, like my son. I also have a child that identifies as transgender, and the lack of movement there is so sad. Because nothing can be done until she is harmed in one way or another. I refuse to give up because we lose too many kids because of ignorance. What do you recommend for parents like myself that fight so hard and get ignored? Or when we are dealing with a district that picks trainings based on what they are comfortable learning about, or they provide in-house professional development?
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing this, and I'm so sorry to hear about your experience. This is something that unfortunately we're hearing about way too often. And I am really glad to hear that you're running as a candidate, because we need people like you that, you know, understand what people are going through. So again, I'm so sorry for your loss and for your experience. So yeah, it's really hard. They don't make it easy. So what do I recommend for parents that fight so hard and get ignored? I think that sometimes if it's the right choice for you and your family, media attention can help sometimes, reaching out to reporters and kind of, you know, being able to shine a light, especially if this is a larger pattern. I think also making sure to be educated on your rights. So both disability rights and also rights to protect your trans child. So at the National Women's Law Center, we work a lot on enforcing the law Title IX. So basically it's the law that requires equal, you know, treatment for equal access to education on the basis of sex. And when we say on the basis of sex, that includes students who identify as trans or non-binary. So the fact is that your child does have rights not to be harassed, not to be in an environment that is not supportive. We actually argue that schools have a duty to protect trans students under Title IX. So I think that it can be helpful to, you know, really kind of read up on your rights, talk to a lawyer. We have resources on our website, but I know that there are others in Pennsylvania as well. Sometimes if it gets that far and you don't want it to get that bad, but sometimes a demand letter or the threat of a lawsuit is what makes them move in some cases. So we have something at my organization called the Legal Network for Gender Equity, where you can submit a request to get connected with an attorney who will provide at least a free consultation. And they deal with issues of discrimination and harassment in schools on the basis of identity. So that's one resource that I'd recommend, because your child definitely has rights. And I will also say on disability rights as well, which includes mental health, there are some organizations that are working really hard to defend parents in this situation. Sometimes, unfortunately, a school district or a school will only listen if there's a lawyer involved. So that's why we do a lot of what we do. And also, I mean, keep doing what you're doing. Politics is sometimes the way to do it. That's kind of why I ended up leaving teaching. I kind of felt like I wasn't really being heard as an educator. So I kind of am in the policy sphere now. But I think it's about finding all the ways, like whether it's law, whether it's the media, whether it's organizing with a group of other people in your position, anything that you can. And I just want to validate that I know that it's so hard and that there aren't easy answers. And this is why we're fighting to make our schools and our systems better, because this isn't good enough. That shouldn't be any child's experience. So I'm sorry, and please reach out if there's any way that I can be more helpful.
Noelia, I wanted to know if you could speak to maybe where you're taking this work now. I know you mentioned in your presentation that you've been doing some workshops with schools, and in discussing all of that, a little bit about maybe your process for building the partnerships either with the schools that the students were at or with the students directly to do this kind of assessment and research. Because a big part of our work at the state level and then what we communicate at the local level is about how do we build these strong cultural community level partnerships. And I think your work really speaks to that.
Yeah, so I was a little lucky in the sense that I, being from Philly, I kind of had a sense of who might be the people to reach out to. So I reached out to a teacher, no, not a teacher actually. I reached out to an after school, like a youth after school citywide programming to see if they could, spread the word about what we were doing and connect us with any students. They connected us with a teacher who had a chess club full of Latina girls who she wanted to give the opportunity to feel more powerful. So they invited us in to do listening sessions and talk about these issues, and a lot of those students ended up working with us long term. We also connected, we also just kind of cold emailed youth organizations in Philadelphia. We got connected with a youth organization, hosted a listening session there with 2 youth organizations actually that led to listening sessions with students. And since then, what helped was having a process for student engagement kind of at every stage. So we had the initial listening sessions, we had the report development, we also had media training for several of the students. So they got the opportunity to speak to press and kind of feel like how good that felt to kind of get their voice out there and be listened to. We had the opportunity for them to present at conferences and things like that, so that, it kept building in terms of what the opportunities were. And we were kind of lucky that the opportunities kept coming up. So that really helped to get them engaged. And the first question was, can you remind me what the first question was? I know there was something else.
I think you touched on it all. Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Circle. Yeah, it was great.
Cool.
Is there anyone else that has a question either on the line or that would like to type into the chat box?
Kelsey, this is Mark. I think we have Elizabeth Garntel that wants to talk. If you can unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yep,
yes,
you're good.
We can hear you.
Yes. Okay, excellent. I'm so sorry. My name is Elizabeth Garntel. I'm a mother of 4 daughters. I was born and raised in New York City. My background is Colombian and Ecuadorian, and I'm currently a chief compliance officer in the financial services. And my contact with you today is through NAMI, Lehigh Valley.
Oh, yes. That's great.
Yes. And I'm a board member, and I am an advocate to try to end the stigma and to communicate and offer services in the community.
Yeah.
Especially in some of the underserved inner city and other areas.
Yeah.
And in the midst of this, I have come across Title IX violations that have impacted my daughter directly. And although you've mentioned 504s and IEPs, which I think are the best kept secrets,
right?
Even after battling a year of some of the challenges my daughter faced, none of the guidance counselors ever offered a 504, nothing. Knowing she had a diagnosis. It was it was only when I attended NAMI's parenting basics course that I hear it, I act it, and we have it. But since then, I have resorted to having to look into Title IX complaints with the Department of Education. You mentioned the IEPs and knowing your rights, but when I went on the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, I found you can very easily, public record, how many schools have all the different types of complaints.
Yes.
And if we're talking about waking up the schools, which I think have our kids under their control and access, and are not giving services, but creating harm, re-traumatizing the students. And by not supporting them and hurting them, the kids are being deprived in education. So to me, yes, I didn't know the Hispanic group
you know, had so many more challenges with language, et cetera. But just in general, without the language, I think the schools have a tremendous amount of training. And I think the way to wake them up is through the Department of Education. So you know, I'm using that resource because that's their job. We pay the federal government.
Right, absolutely.
And they are attorneys, and I can tell you they know what they're doing. It sounds like the same thing with you. That's their expertise and their part. And what's really sad is there's a lot of attorneys that will defend kids that have been accused of Title IX offenses, you know, of sexual and all other natures. But to find an attorney, it's typically the state that defends you. So that is a smaller group of attorneys and expertise. And I don't think money should be the reason parents can't challenge the schools or anything else to prevent. And I can tell you what's really sad is of all the kids I know through my daughter and her school, and these are talented, smart kids, and parents have chosen to just take them home and homeschool and cyber because they cannot deal with the schools themselves.
Yeah. And that's school push out. That's exactly what we're talking about.
And what's sad is that the Title IX person at the school is also the CEO of the school, which is a direct conflict of interest. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know. So it's so just if people don't know, it's real simple. Just Google Title IX OCR complaints, how to file it. They're super responsive. There's a window of 180 days. But if there's something that started well before that and it's all connected, they can go past it. I just say, let's use what's out there. And I'm happy that the woman talked about the other parents involved network. I was not aware. I'm going to look into that. So I think us parents become advocates out of necessity. You know,
Absolutely.
It's not. So thank you for today's presentation.
Thank you. I always think no one should have to be an advocate. You know, I don't want us to have to be advocates, but that's the position that we're put in. And thank you so much. That's a great point about the OCR and the Title IX complaints. You actually helped me remember that, you know, there is a very dedicated team of people at the Office of Civil Rights who are working on complaints like this. We have a lot of fights with the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, about what we feel she's been doing to kind of undermine the rights of student survivors. But I know that, you know, there is a staff at OCR that is working very hard despite all of that. So that's a really good point to bring up. And yes, absolutely use those resources. So thank you for sharing that.
And about the group that you studied or how you made your contact entry into the community through those after-school programs, we've been looking at ways to you know, get into that arena, and I think that's another great resource I wasn't aware of. And I've been leading up an outreach effort in Allentown and some of the major cities out here in Lehigh County, in Northampton County. So I think, you know, thank you for that, because that's another segue for us to break in right to the kids, to the source, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And best of luck with that. And let me know if there's any way I can support. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And Noelia, I think I remembered too that second part of the earlier question, which I think is if no one else has additional questions they want to type into the chat box or comment with. It was just about, you know, the workshops that you showed in the presentation. Those looked fantastic. Yes. Are you still doing them? And how could people maybe partner to do more of them?
Yes. So when we sent out our reports to all of the Philadelphia schools, we included a letter that basically said we're happy to do workshops with you, with your staff, students, on any of these issues and recommendations. A couple of teachers took us up on that, and that's when we had some of the great workshops with students. We're unfortunately not planning to do them in the near future just because of, you know, everything changing with COVID-19 and, you know, being remote. But it is something where if an educator reaches out to us, we're always willing to work with them, try to have students talk with them if we can, to provide any resources. Right now we are still doing work on the With the school district, we've made some progress, but it came after a lot of fighting. And we have had to use the media a couple of times to put pressure on the school district in Philadelphia. We are seeing some progress. The school district is now committing to more openly sharing with students and families what mental health resources are available through school. We have some movement on funding for mental health professionals, school-based mental health professionals, and training. So we're really just following up and making sure that they're actually going to implement the things they say they're going to implement. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. On the federal level, we're still working with a congresswoman's office on a bill that would provide even more mental health support to school districts and, you know, to the targeted support that communities need. So that's kind of where the fight is right now. But we're also just kind of responding day by day to all of the traumas that our students are experiencing, and Title IX violations is definitely one of them. Students who experience a lot of harassment and violence, and that's something that we're always working on, and that is very connected to mental health. So yeah, that's kind of what the work is looking like right now. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Great. Well, we cannot thank you enough for this fantastic presentation. I think that's a great note to end on. We do want to let everyone know who's attended the webinar today. We're just reposting it. We posted a few times in the chat box, but today's webinar, as well as all of our previous webinars, are available for download and viewing on our PA Care Partnership website. The link is now in the chat box. Along with the slides today, and Noelia's contact information will be posted to that website and to that page. So they're also available for the chat box. If you haven't had a chance to download them yet, you can download them. If you just sort of scroll up to the beginning of the chat, we will hold the line just for a few minutes if anyone has any directed questions to myself, but we cannot thank you enough for joining, and we hope that you take care, stay well, and are doing your best to self-isolate at home.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelsey, and everyone for joining us. And yeah, I wish the same to you all. Stay safe and healthy as best you can. So thank you so much.